Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unofficial podcast. My name is Oleg. I'm technical, could be called solution. I'm just an architect working right now at Salesforce. We developing, growing, helping community that we have. And today with me, I have Peter. Peter, hello, can you introduce yourself? What are you doing for the people who doesn't know you? Tell me just about yourself.
My name is Peter Schmalfeldt. I am a software engineer at Red Band Workshop. Been there for about 3 years, maybe 4, I think. I'm not 100% sure anymore. Work for different clients over there, making some cool stuff for them. And then on the side, basically whenever I run into a specific problem at Red Band that I feel like needs a custom tool made, I make one. And then I usually release it as open source. Just because I know if I'm running into that problem, probably someone else is too, and why not? So that's kind of how that started with Red Band. We just said, hey, you know what? Why not release what we're working on? If it helps other people, it helps other people. If not, then then at least we can use it internally. So yeah.
Cool.
For me,
just if we made make a step back a bit in your life, how you actually ended up with Salesforce Commerce Cloud, what happened in your life? What were you doing before that?
That's the story. All right, so I've been doing software development. Let's see, I'm 43. I've been doing it since I was 19, officially after college. So I was a graphic designer first because I did illustrations and drawing. So that's what got my design background. That got me into wanting to develop the things that I was designing as a web designer. Then that got me into wanting to be able to do the the system operational aspect of stuff, like building servers and things like that, because I wanted to be able to do the things I had in my head, and it required me to understand all the different aspects of everything. So started with the design, wanted to make the designs functional, then learned to do the development, then needed to take that development and make it work in the real world, so on servers, things like that. That led me into a life of freelance work for 15 years. And then then I started getting clients that needed specific things built for them. So they would ask me to do things that normally hadn't been done before in the web. So I was in this weird niche where I was developing custom products for companies, and so I've done stuff for like Nike. I've done things recently for Google. I've done things for some pretty large companies that were just wanted very specific things that didn't exist. And this is before content management systems and all that stuff started to kind of be a thing. That transitioned then into a lot of those larger clients were on e-commerce or already doing retail, and so Salesforce comes along and kind of becomes a bigger player for a lot of these companies that I was already working for, but I had no experience with it, and so but I've done e-commerce and every type of development on the planet, I feel like, for web development for nearly 20 years, and I was just well, I don't know Salesforce. I feel like that would be a good thing to add to my bucket list of stuff I can do. And so I had somebody I had worked with in the past. I was kind of helped lead a mobile team for answers.com 8 years ago, I think. So one of the employees there was they had 50,000 people a second using mobile applications and all the rest of the stuff. So we were doing some pretty cool cutting edge stuff. One of the lead designers over there ended up working at Red Band, and he was loving the place and telling me about how much he's loved it, and said that they were working on Commerce Cloud Salesforce. And I was like, ooh, that's the thing I wanted to get into, but I didn't really have a gateway in, so it didn't really make any sense. And so at the time I was also kind of looking to see if I could expand on that stuff, and it made sense to I started talking to Red Band, and Red Band's yeah, it doesn't matter if you're not certified or that stuff right now. We do bring in people that have a more senior experience with web stuff, and if you're able to kind of work towards a certification, then we can get you started with that, and you can just learn along the way. So we'll put you with some people that can teach you. And I was like, that's a golden opportunity for me. Work directly with people who are doing this professionally, and I already had a retail experience in my background, so that was yeah, like I used to manage a shoe store. I was being trained for regional manager when I was 20 to like do retail stuff. And so I was like, no, I got to go to college. And I really wanted to get into computers and whatever. So kind of naturally like led to Salesforce being a product that I wanted to get familiar with anyway, or more of a platform, I guess. But yeah, so now I'm in my head, I'm like, ooh, because I do like a lot of architect stuff anyway. So I'm thinking that the like a senior architecting position over the next few years is kind of where I wanted to see myself going, because I've already done a bunch of like back end developments, building custom applications from scratch, and so this transition into this stuff has been like, it's mostly just kind of learning how the platform works, I guess. And then once you get into it, then it's like now I've been building custom tools to make my job easier, and apparently it's helping other people. So it's my third year in it. So I was like, if I kept doing it, feels like it'd be a pretty good fit. So,
Amazing and inspiring story, I must say. Really, like I hope that people that watch or hear us, they will become motivated, to do like even more great stuff. And I really appreciate all the tooling that you and your team was building so far. I personally was using them from time to time. I cannot say that today, like as of today, I'm really like that active coder. I still code from time to time, but usually do more architect stuff. So I don't have that much need, to work to use dev tools or dev console, which we'll speak today, right. I guess we'll see. Anyway, like, so in terms of the tooling, like we today wants to talk about Red Van Workshop Developers Core tool. Like, is it tool solution? Maybe you can describe it in the better way, what it actually is. So what it is about, like what we are talking, because I bet like people who looking at you and me right now, or like hear us, there could be people who never heard about it. Like what it is, what is the value behind this one?
It started, honestly, I had already kind of like been working on internal, like just separate tools myself. And then we hired this new developer named Steven Hendricks, who was put on the way a lot of the systems integration stuff you have, like with these companies, you have core groups of people who form a team, and those teams work with clients. So Steven was new, and then during his onboarding, he was just kind of assigned to chat with me and help him do some onboarding stuff. And then I was just kind of getting to know him, and he was showing me his old client website and his skills. Kind of, we're getting to know each other, and he showed me this like console thing, and I was like, what is this, dude? And so he's like, oh, that's just this thing I built, and it helps me do. I'm like, wait, yeah, but you can like in real time test server-side software without having to upload it. I was like, you can actually just write it in the browser, hit a button, and it'll execute that code, and you can get the result of that in the browser without. Because the normal process for people who might not be fully aware of it is that you usually have to, open up VS Code, or back in the day it was Eclipse, and you'd edit the code. Then you'd have to upload it to the server. Then you'd have to refresh the page, wait for it to execute. And if it didn't do what you wanted to do, you'd do it all over again. And you just have to keep doing that. And it took forever. But if you just wanted to know something like who's my current, like what's my session for this specific or custom variable for this specific session thing, or what do I get as a result for this specific customer lookup, you could, theoretically, you could write code and then execute it, send it to some thing in the back end, and then it sends the response back to you. And Steven just was kind of the first person to put that together. And to me, it blew my mind, because I came from a background where I did a lot of like PHP and more like server-side programming stuff, and it had tools that did that kind of stuff, but I just never bridged the connection that like you could actually write your own tool for that. So after Steven showed that to me, I was like, yeah, this is kind of a game changer, honestly. Like, this is the ability to write custom, like to write your own code and execute it in a browser in the same session that you have on your own dedicated sandbox without having to upload anything, and then just being able to execute that. I was like, to me, that makes everything go ridiculously faster. I said that, so I told him, I was like, the only thing that I would change with this is that initially it was a joke. It was a bright white theme, and I wanted to support dark themes. I was like, could we maybe do that? And then it kind of evolved into like, well, what are the other things that other people might want from this? And so we're like, we brought it, threw it around a couple different people. So I worked with Steven on just basically trying not to step on his toes on that, or what he originally did, and make sure it did everything that he originally wanted it to do. But then we had a lot of great ideas, like one of our people we were working with over at Patagonia named Ted, he realized that, and it was just like genius stuff that we're like, oh, you could totally do that. And so what he wanted it to do was to be able to give him a response of like how quick a execution of a script returned a response. So in his use case, he wanted to test which API from a third party got the fastest results back. And so he wanted to be able to test his code and actually in real time get that response back. So we worked with him to figure out like, well, let's not include the time it actually takes when you hit the submit button and it sends the request to the server. Like, let's actually start the clock once it gets to the server and then stop it once it's getting ready to send the response back. So we've got the exact time it took to execute that code. So he could really fine tune like how long did that actually take to run and just keep doing it until he gets the timing down. And I was like, that's a genius idea. I'm like, I personally haven't even used it yet, but for him, he uses it all the time because he does a lot more of the systems integrations with third parties. I tend to not do that. So we hadn't thought of it, but we've gotten a lot of great like contributions where people were just, hey, I could use that to test, different things for me. We had somebody who wanted to test, like business manager, role versus the storefront role, so they wanted to be able to execute something as a job. So they contributed to made a pull request to actually make it so that they can run the console as a business manager user and not just as a storefront user. So they can test things with jobs that I was like, I would have never even considered that, but obviously it can do that. So it's been really interesting to see kind of like the growth of like how people want this to evolve. And so it's turned into like a pretty useful tool for people. And I kind of saw it for myself as like, this could be huge, but like other people are like, this is way bigger than I think you guys even realize. We can make this into something great. So just really wanted to focus on make it easy to contribute and go down that. So that's how that started, that very first version. So that didn't include the drawer thing, which was separate. It was that original dev console was just me and Steven kind of brainstorming what we can do, and then people building on top of it from there. So yeah.
So what I hear, you have like a big team that supports it, like the one that contributes to it. Like, is it just internal team, or I heard that you also have there are external stakeholders.
What's interesting about this situation is it's our clients that are using this. So like, it's not our internal team that's using this. Like our relationship at Red Van is basically we supplement the development teams for these other agencies, and since we've got, I don't even know how many different teams. I mean, we have a lot of different clients we work with. So since we have different people who know about this tool and then they use it internally at the company, some of those other developers, in the case of like Patagonia, when we first started working on this, Ted over there at Patagonia, he's their developer. He works on their team. He was just like, oh, I could use this to solve my specific problem. Like, great. And then New Balance people started to contribute because they had, and that's another one of our clients, and then they had a specific need for something that they wanted with stuff we were working on. So it just kind of worked. We originally created the tools to solve problems that developers were having. And then it continued to kind of like grow out from there, where the actual clients were like, we still have that problem too. Like, could we, but like when Page Designer SFRA came out, for example, it's a good one. So when we originally did one of our Chrome extensions that we worked on, it didn't support tracking Page Designer assets, and so there's a dev tool that actually lets you do that. So they added a support for that. So it's kind of started with us. There's usually like one or two people working on it internally. Then it goes out to our clients, and then our clients use it. And then if they want to tweak it, they do. And then they just make a pull request, and we review it and make sure it works and merge it back in. And so a lot of the contributions after the initial release are coming from people who are using it. So it's been pretty nice.
Question. Yeah. So how Red Van Workshop as an organization, as a company, supports you with this one? Like like, do you guys, I don't know, not sure if it's called like a pet project, and you like in Google, usually they have like 10% of the time you can spend on your favorite one, or it's more like open source one where people just trying to find their own time to do the stuff? Like how,
because it's kind of a combination of both. I know that Red Band's got internally the ability to, we do allocate time to work on projects like this. And so it could be part of the people's thing. For me, a lot of this was, I just, like the original GitHub repository for Red Band didn't exist before I started. So they were such a small team at that point. I think there was like 25 people, and now we're like at 100 and like 10, 100, 120 maybe. I don't know. Wow. We've grown a lot. But at that point, with like they had some internal tools, but there wasn't really like a team put around it. And so I kind of wanted to be a driving force for open source, mainly for two reasons. It was that I felt like if we were contributing to the community, if we were trying to actively attract, top talent, then they're going to want to know like who is Red Band and what did they do, and have I heard of them before? So that was like the one problem. The other one is like, well, a lot of clients usually for systems integrations are probably going to want to refer to their internal dev team to see like, who should we hire? Are these guys any good? And then if there's a chance that we've made tools that those people are using, and they had to make a choice between us versus somebody else, they might go, oh, we actually use that for our development team, so maybe go with these guys if they developed that. And it could be a no-brainer. So that's where I was like, let's start there. We've already got internally a bunch of really helpful tools. Makes sense that like if we're okay with it to release it, as long as we're not like giving away anything super secret or like giving away client information. So what started from there is I worked with the partners to kind of figure out like, how do we want to approach open source contributions? What rules do we want to have in place? What sets of permissions do we want to have before something gets deployed? Like who needs to review it? We ended up coming up with a contribution license agreement, which is like the CLA, which is normal for open source like companies that release things. It basically makes it so that we can keep the tool open and free, give it out to the world. And if somebody, like in our case, our clients that are using it can then contribute back to it, but then they can't come back and say, oh, well, that's ours. I was like, well, and that, like, as part, we're making this open for everybody, so let's make sure it stays open for everybody. So there's an agreement in there saying if you're contributing to this, you're contributing that, and you're agreeing that it's fine for everyone else to keep using this. So that you can't come back and be like, that's mine, you're not allowed to use it, kind of thing. So so that was really the only kind of cover your butt thing that we had to do to make sure we're going to do it. And then, and then otherwise internally, I think there was like a moment where we had to have a review of like when we kind of went back in and looked at our previous projects to make sure that we had done that for everything. So, everything should be good from here. But that was a growing process for sure internally to figure out how we wanted to manage open source contributions and help people without like shooting ourselves in the foot financially or whatever with other stuff, like giving away a bunch of really cool stuff. True. It's a balancing act.
Okay, let's imagine. Cool. So let's imagine now, let's say I'm in developer, right? Let's say I heard about our story and I'm going to the GitHub, to Red Van Workshop repository, like group organization GitHub. And then I see Red Van Workshop Developers Core. And from there, I just see two names, Dev Console and Dev Tools.
Right.
What are those two? Like, what's the difference between them? I mean...
Right, yeah. So the first one I talked about earlier, the one that Stephen Hendricks worked on, that was the Dev Console. And that is like a dedicated app. It's built using Vue.js as a backend. It's basically like a JavaScript framework. And it had it's like 95% Stephen and like 5% of me polishing and adding a little bit of love and UI and UX experience and, making it, and then contributions are built on top of that. The Dev Tools thing is 100% me. And that came out of something that I wanted. And if there's any PHP developers on there, there's an old school stuff called like framework in PHP called CodeIgniter. And CodeIgniter had a amazing debug dev drawer, basically, that sat at the bottom. If anyone's familiar with that, in my head, I wanted that. I wanted that for Salesforce. I wanted it like so bad, like where I could see, like in real time at the bottom, like what's in my checkout, like what's in my basket, where am I currently located at as far as the user is concerned, what session information is there, do I have any, like, just stuff like that. So it could just literally click little icon, it slides out, there's a little drawer on the bottom, and then I can open it up and then kind of just see all that stuff. And then as the page is refreshing, or even an Ajax calls, if I'm adding something to my cart, that'd be able to trigger that update. Especially with SFRA, they have a bunch of like hooks in for that. Yeah, see, you're getting it like in your face.
Yeah,
That's what I
you
wanted.
actually triggered me.
Yeah,
You
that's why
triggered
I
me
built
because
that. Yeah, I'm an old school PHP guy, so that's where I was like, man, that would be like on my sandbox to be able to have that would be great. Then I got a little crazier, and I was like, whoa, you know what else would be cool? CodeIgniter also has a bunch of like debug areas where like you can actually write and analyze debug messages, and then it shows up as like a dedicated place as well. So I was like, technically I could do that. I could create on Salesforce. What I ended up doing is I created a custom cache, because you don't, unfortunately there's no way, if you're at Salesforce, maybe you can get them to let us do this as developers. But it's like, unfortunately, I couldn't find a way where you can actually access during render a list of all of the server messages without using WebDAV or some crazy stuff like that. But most of the time, like what
yeah,
I'm trying to do as a developer is, if I'm trying to debug something or something's breaking, if I either have to use like VS Code and step through everything as a debugger. But even then, like there's nothing like a stack trace where you would actually be able to see like what's the order of execution for this, like what files were called and which lines and all that stuff. It doesn't give you that. You just have to kind of go through one procedural thing at a time until you see what you're getting at. Or you can use the internal logger that comes with Salesforce, and then go look at like Log Center or whatever to try to like find the thing that you're looking for, and then you have to like go through all this stuff. So what I wanted with this dev tools is, I wanted a way that I can actually write a hook that uses native hooks. It works with SiteGenesis. It also works with SFRA, where I can write a log statement and then spit out an object and then have it show up at the bottom of the web page that I'm looking at. So then I don't have to go to Log Center. I don't have to go try to like have two separate things, because as a developer, I've got my editor, I've got the storefront, or whatever I'm working on. It's usually I've got those two things, and I'm switching back and forth. But for the dev tools, I was like, if I can make so the log messages go to that dev drawer, then I can actually basically in real time, as I'm writing code, I can make it work with anything server side, ISML messages, JavaScript, or Demandware scripts, and then just write this little snippet of code. And then instead of using the native logger, it'll use the DevTools logger, and it'll just spit it out to that. So that works really great. You can actually do in this DevTools thing, it'll actually now, like, you can write in an ISML file in JavaScript or server side and Demandware scripts, write your log statement, and it'll actually send it to your browser. And you can look at it in that DevTools drawer, and you can sort it by messages. There's a stack trace actual option that I actually wrote that will go through every single line of code that got executed throughout that call. So you can see that this log messages started here, but it was called through this entire stack. So it's ridiculously helpful. It's the first time that I've ever had access to a call stack in Salesforce, as far as I'm aware that's how I can make it work. I was like, but it works great. Like, it'll actually tell you the entire order of operations of everything that got executed until it got to that file, just like a stack trace is supposed to. And in addition to that, there might be times where you don't want the dev drawer open, and so you kind of have it removed. I also took those log messages and I actually spit them out to the native console in the browser. So if you have your the web inspector open and you're inspecting something, you can actually look at the console and it'll actually write your log messages. So if you did like a log for, .log or .debug or .warn or .error or whatever the traditional console stuff is, there's a matching version of that in this dev tools, and it'll actually spit that out into your dev console in the browser. So you can actually be just inspecting something and then clicking through and there's Ajax event listeners, it'll actually fire and you'll actually see your log messages in real time come in the dev console in the browser that you're using to test stuff out, and you don't have to go anywhere else. So to me, that like made it cut my time like wait. So if I needed to debug something, or if I just wanted to quickly like say, is this Ajax thing doing what I'm trying to do, or is this, like when the page is loading, is that data there? I can just like write a log statement and it'll just show up. And as I navigate through the site, it just kind of builds this nice little queue of things. So that is DevTools. It's not the same as Dev Console, which just lets you write code in real time and test it. This is more of like a more like full featured like inspector of all the stuff that's happening on your sandbox in the custom debugger. So a lot more like the PHP's version of what they did in that CodeIgniter debugger. So I try to mirror.
When I said before that, you triggered me, because I actually also was PHP guy. I also started with CodeIgniter, and then when you said about that tool, I actually forgot about it. But when you started to describe it, I was like, exactly, I use that one.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I had to find old screenshots of it and go through because I couldn't find I didn't have it installed anywhere anymore, and I was like, oh man, it's like that thing used to be so great, like as a debug tool, because it was a nice, pretty little drawer, and it had the Symfony's got something like that with PHP still, but yeah, as far as like Salesforce goes, they don't have anything like that. I mean, they got that little like gear icon in the top left corner lets you do some stuff, but that's about it for actual in-browser experience for debugging stuff. So
yeah, well, I'll ask actually the next question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That was it. Yeah, that wasn't enough for me. So I was kind of like, I wanted to build something myself. So that's what that DevTools was, just a passion project of mine internally, where I was like, I wonder if I can make that, and I did. And now, with a few of our clients are just like, I don't know how I did development without this before. I was like, right, it's so handy, like just to have everything right there. I was like, it should just come with Salesforce. Salesforce can have it if they want it, or they're probably Red Band might sell it to them if they want it.
Actually, before asking you next one, wanted to share my case study, my personal one of using the tool. So, like usually, at least my history of development of the project that I did before, at least I saw it a common pitfall, a common, let's say, issue in all the projects that I was involved, that over the time when project is evolving, quality assurance mainly focus on UI UX perspective when they test find functionalities working. But usually developers or QAs will not check error logs, right? Like they might have some logs, not always, right? When you reach production, and you're in production within, like, let's say some site is on production for years, you might have those thousands or hundreds of thousands logs. And when something happens on production, you go to the log center and trying to understand what's happening, you just lost in all those error logs, right? So let's say the best practice is when you develop a new feature, you are trying, but at least you are trying not to involve new error logs, right? Not new logs that something, I mean, it could not impact UI UX, but something is behind that, something is not expected, and it's making the logs. So how I use your tool, I was actually, when developing or trying others were doing, checking the logs and looking if they were increasing or not. If I saw, because when you run the flow, usually without the tool, you would have to go to the logs and check all the files, maybe see the timestamps, if there were new logs or not. You could use other extensions from extension to, I don't know, maybe group them up or clear. But with this one, you don't need to go anywhere. As you said, this is like usual day-to-day developer work. If I have a big screen, I have my Visual Studio Code, Eclipse, JetBrains, any tool you use, right? On the right side, and maybe on the different screens, right? I have my browser. That's all. If I have to check logs, I have to another tab or maybe another window. If I have to use, I know, other stuff, right? You would have to use different tools, and more tools, right. It's more friction. But if you're having the same view, as you said, I know, I call it like you have like Starship Enterprise. DevTools is a Starship Enterprise that enable your Commerce Cloud development, and give you all the tools, all the fancy one. But it's not just fancy; they're actually useful.
Right, absolutely. Well, so the previous version, the very first, before I even got into this DevTools, I made an SFCC-CLI, which is another like tool that we have that it's open source. and it actually also does something that you're talking about, like similar to what you're talking about. But it's completely in terminal, and you can watch logs in real time as you're navigating the site, and you can filter using regex so that you can actually say only show me today's logs and only show me logs that might match this specific pattern. And so you can start that up and then navigate the website, and then on your little terminal session in the background you'll actually see those log messages coming in real time, so you don't have to go dig it all. It's my way of being like, oh, because a lot of this, obviously, I know people say this a lot, but it comes out of laziness. Like I didn't want to have to go to Log Center.
You're a lazy developer, right? You're a lazy one.
Yeah,
lazy
I'm
developers
the
doing stuff up front.
there is. Absolutely. I was like, I get a lot of like custom tools made, but it's purely because I don't want to have to do all this other work.
I feel you.
Yeah. So
I feel you so much.
That CLI tool has been great for that. So I originally made it for because it also did watch and like these other commands. I hated Eclipse so much that I refused to use it. But I didn't want to I wanted to be other than you needed it for stuff like debugging a pipeline, like back in the day, like for SFRA. So like you were kind of forced to use it in that situation. But other than that, like you could really use whatever editor you wanted. But there was that whole issue with like, well, how does your code get uploaded? Like how does it know? There's this whole like watch that happens with Eclipse that like knows that when you made a file change that it like triggers an upload and a compile and all the rest of that. And I was like, well, that's just all like Node stuff. And I've had a Node background for like 10 years. I'm like, I could write my own like little CLI tool that I can just start watching a file like in a repository, and then just it can do all that uploading, watching itself. I don't need to use Eclipse for that. I only really need to use Eclipse for pipeline debugging. So that was originally what started it. And then I was like, oh, I can do cool things like log filtering and search logs from the past, or do real-time watching of logs in the future. So that's another one of the tools that we got out there. That's probably one of the first tools that got created, because before we switched more to SFRA, where like I didn't have to use Eclipse, and we can use an actual decent editor like VS Code. Cool. So made life a lot easier after that switch.
Is there any dependency between Dev Console and Dev Tools, or they're two independent tools, or like you rely on something?
They both are using Vue.js as a framework, but that really everything after that is just like custom stuff that's built on top of it. So I don't even think we're using like CSS frameworks or anything. I think it's all custom stuff that I built. So it's so we were already using Vue for the stuff that Steven had written, and then I just kept it because I was like, well, we're already using it, so I might as well just extend everything else with that. So, but yeah.
So let's say I just want to use DevTools. Can I use just DevTools without Dev Console and vice versa?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So each cartridge, actually, what's really nice about the stuff now is that like it will automatically show. Oh, this is for SFRA. Like we tap into the native SFRA hooks, because there's like before. What are they like? Before header, after header, before footer, after footer.
Yes.
Like these custom bindings that you can do for hooks. And so this will automatically look at that and it'll inject it if you've got the cartridge in your cartridge path. And then like the example that I've got in the repository, you can even wrap it with a hook to say if the hook is there. It's kind of like a hacky way of using Salesforce, where you can say like, I want to be able to accidentally leave this code in there without it causing a problem. So like if it made its way to production somehow, like it just won't work. And for one, like none of these tools actually won't work in production anyway, because there's a specific code in there that says if it's a production environment, just exit and it won't show up. But if it did, for whatever reason, that there's an actual code block in there that says if that hook's not, or if check to see if the hook's there before you execute anything, and if it's not, it just ignores it. So you can write all your debug statements and all that stuff without ever having to really worry about it that much. So, but yeah, as far as dependencies everything started with Vue.js, and then individually we wanted to split out each main tool into its own cartridge, and then we wanted the cartridges to be able to live on their own. I would say the only real overlap is that there is a button on the Dev Tools, which is that little dev drawer bar thing at the bottom that we talked about.
Yeah.
It does have
that you can navigate to dev console. I use that one.
Navigate to dev console.
It's easier.
So yeah, and if you don't have that installed, it's just going to be like, I don't know what this is.
Okay.
But that's the only overlap between the two is if you click that link. I could probably update that to check to see if you've got that installed or not, and then not show it. But yeah, it's there right now, like for sure.
Yeah, you actually mentioned checking if hook is there. That is actually nice. Let's say, as for me, this is cool architecture pattern, because if you're familiar with B2C CRM thing, the new solution that like accelerated framework that connects Service Cloud and Commerce Cloud, it's actually using the same concept. It's first checking is hook is in place. Is hook is in place, then it will trigger the logic.
Yeah. That to me that's the most way it makes sense with that. Actually, we just for a client that we're working with now, one of the new they had a really complicated features. A bunch of them were overlapping, and they might want to be able to turn one off and one on, and they weren't sure how to end. But there was like so much code that was all tied into it, and so we decided to split everything up based off of whether or not a hook existed, because then they can just disable a cartridge, and literally everything just kind of goes away magically. Nothing gets executed, nothing shows up. All the little partials that were all over the place on the site just go away. And so it's like, it's way different than a site preference. I mean, they're kind of similar where as far as that goes, but it's like, if you could just easily remove the cartridge, then all of the code just goes away too. So it's so much nicer and clean. Usually a combination of both sometimes can be used, but yeah, we're just like, we'll just make everything based off of whether or not a hook exists. And if it doesn't, then it won't work. So it'll be like nothing happened. It's like
it generally reminds me microkernel architecture, where you have one, right, and you can plug and play different stuff. It's at least I assume this is how guys who develop SFRA and actually did this come to with the hooks. They were inspired by microkernel architecture, where you can have a core, right, and then you can just plug independent, just validating something there with magic way, right? Without manually configuring all the stuff, you can just validate. Oh, is something there? Abstract it there. Right. Oh, cool. Let me just do my stuff. If it's not there, okay, I'm not running.
Cool. Yeah, once you get into that type of mentality for development, then it kind of changes the way you think about development too, because it's not so much just like custom preferences and like custom objects and things like that. You're actually like extracting it out to like the actual infrastructure level, even how the cartridges themselves work it becomes that's why I'm super fascinated with Salesforce, and I'm appreciative of my background as like a more of a back end guy before I started Salesforce, because I was like, oh, once I got in here and I could see what's available, and the more I learn, the more I'm like, wow, there's so much stuff you can do. But yeah, if you weren't a server or back-end person on the architect side of this stuff, would be probably a little complicated for sure, because it's a pretty big platform. But yeah.
That's true. Okay, so let's say we go to the bar, you and me, I'm a new guy, right? And I'm saying okay, Peter, what are main 3 features of DevTools, and what are 3 main features of that console? What you would just to pitch 3 main most valuable features of each of them. What are they?
So Dev Console, which is the independent page with the code, on one side and the results on the other. I would say the biggest feature out of that one is that it is a browser-based code editor. It lets you run real-time server-side code in your browser and get real results for it. You can, as the first one. The second one is allows you to create your own scripts and save them, so that you can have for later, you can come back in and say, I want to be able to make a custom script, and I don't want to keep typing it out every single stupid time. I want to save it. So that would be the second one. The third one, I would say, let's see, probably, I don't know. Me personally, it's just the ability to interact with the server timing and execution of timing for performance sake, so that you can actually see how quickly something is running and being executed, and it has a little timestamp on there to tell you that. So that would probably be the 3 main ones for the Dev Console. The Dev Tools. The Dev Tools, which is a little drawer. Just that one's mostly just quick access to your most important sandbox information stuff that's on the bottom. Having that custom logger that writes your debug statements back to your drawer is also super handy. and then being able to write those log messages in not in anything server side, so ISML, JavaScript, or demandware scripts is amazing. So
Okay.
you're not stuck with like one type of file. It's like literally any server side stuff will work with that. So those are the three for the dev tools.
Amazing. So the end persona, let's say user persona, right? Usually we have to, like, at least when we try to do some any commerce project, in my experience, we're trying to visualize end persona for the commerce, right? Like, who is our end users, how they look, what they like to do. So who is end user for dev tools and dev console? Are there only like developers or technical leads, or maybe even someone like who actually can see the value? Because let's imagine, right, it's not only developers who can watch and listen to us right now, it could be other people. So what would are they able to do this? Are they able to use this one? And
So
who
that's
will be
where,
that
like,
person?
I would say the client at Patagonia, the way that they were testing it, which was it was originally developed to be 100% transparent for developers by developers, and so that
Okay.
was originally the goal for it. Where we started seeing other people coming in was QA people, who were like, we're testing certain things and make sure we're getting certain results, and they had the ability to actually like and this is more the dev tools thing than the dev console, because they're not usually writing code, the QA people.
Yeah.
But they could definitely see that, like, do I have the right location for whatever reason? This sandbox is telling, or the instance is not showing me the correct information on the site. Am I just screwing up, or is this actually like something that's not showing up? Do I have the right setting for X, but it's just not
Okay.
rendering correctly? So there's a way they can actually tell, like, yes, it's according to this actual system itself, things are this way, but the way that the developer might have written something is failing, and they can actually compare between the two, because they can actually see, the developers mess up all the time. I mess up all the time. So it's possible when they release
Me
some
too.
code, yeah, right, that like just shows up something completely horrible, and then they're like, hey, the whole site's busted, and then there's this whole discussion of like, well, is it the code, or is it like, is it actually working and it's just not showing up correctly, or is it actually busted and something else is going on? And so it's just another way that you can kind of actually quickly see, like, well, what does the server think it has as just like a little drawer that you can slide up and say, well, example in this case was the user location, like it's not correctly using a store locator, and it's not figuring out where the user's at. And it was like, well, people were using VPNs and things like that. So I was like, well, where does it think you are? And it's like, well, it's giving me this location and on the storefront. I was like, right, but where does Salesforce think you're at? Because there's another kind of underlevel thing of what's going on.
Yeah.
Normally you don't have access to that. So now with this dev drawer, you can just slide it up and it tells you, like, we think you're at this physical location with this IP address and stuff, or latitude and longitude. So yeah, it's just one way for them to do that. And then the people who are doing like the third part, as we have like with Patagonia, they had people who were specifically, they're developers, but they were like more systems integrations people. So they were working with third parties that were then wanting to like do performance testing and analyzing that kind of stuff. So it was way like a pigeonhole type of developer, where they're like, we're making sure that everything is going to be really great, that the number of API calls are happening are low, and because there's limits on that stuff. And so they were able to use the dev console tools for that. And that wasn't something the developers were really considering. And then figuring out performance on that to say, like, oh, well, it seems like if we execute it this way, there's a bit of a hang and it takes longer. But if we, and they can actually test the code, and they can actually, what was more important, they can send the third party to the URL, and then the URL they can actually test it and have a little script that was like, use this script and then test it yourself. Like, you don't have to take my word for it. Like, here you go, just run it. And then they can be like, oh, right. So, because they usually these third parties have developers too, and they need some way of being able to, like, how can I execute code on their environment so that I can actually make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's not just somebody uploading code to the sandbox or wherever to make sure it's working. It's like they can execute it in a browser. So yeah, if they're doing that, definitely use a storefront username and password though. So you don't want anyone just to run code on your sandbox, but. Yeah. So yeah, there's all sorts of really creative ways that people are using this stuff that's not just developers. So we've had QA people, different systems integrations people. We've even had like project managers who are just debugging like order product related data just to make sure stuff is happening. But usually they're just asking a developer to give them like how they would test something. But yeah, it's been
Okay.
all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, you spoke about mistakes, and I remembered we have in Ukraine, if I properly translate it, it will be something like person who never did mistake actually never tried to do anything.
Yeah,
So
right.
the meaning is like there is no there is anyone in the world who wouldn't just make any mistake. Like if he didn't make any mistake, it means he didn't try anything. Or like Mandela said, we never, let's say, lose. We either win or learn, right? So it's similar. Maybe it's trying a bit different, but it's the same concept, right? You will do some mistakes along the way. It's normal, and you just move forward. And with that, I have a question. So, are there any known issues or like with the tool, like a backlog feature that you're planning to release, and how would, let's say, someone outside interact with the team who is actually developing this, right? So let's say known issues, backlog features, and interaction, like, right?
Right. So as of, if you'd asked me like, I think was it a week ago or 10 days ago, I just did that update. Yes, there would have been, but there was quite a few features that people had asked for, and then a bunch of really great PRs. And then those are all officially out. There's a new version of that developers core. I think it's 1.2.0.
Yeah, 1.2.0. Yeah.
Yeah, so that has everything in it as of right now. That was actually stuff that was bug fixes and things that people had wanted to get into. The only exception to that is that internally we had on the dev console, there was the idea thrown around that if this is going to be more like an actual normal editor, like in VS Code or whatever, it's possible to edit more than one file at a time, and it could be cool to have like more than one tab open so that you can switch between tabs. And technically the editor supports it, but there's all this like complicated stuff of making that work functionally, because we're trying to make it simple, where we're like, oh, this is kind of getting into like, you know, full-blown code editor thing at this point. But it's like, well, is it really though? Because it's close, and as long as we have the ability to, you know, we just have to go back in and do some work on cleaning all that up. And that would probably be a me thing at that point, because I've had the most, other than Steven, I've had the most experience with this tool. But yeah, so I just need to have time to get that stuff done. But I do like the idea of it. But for now, I'm like, having the ability to actually execute server-side code never wasn't there before, and now it is. So having one is better than zero, but having more than one, like, it's like, I guess I can see the value of that. But especially if you're using it regularly and you needed to switch between, like, you know, like if you're testing a couple different things at the same time, like I could see an example of wanting to switch back and forth between those different tabs and doing that. So that's kind of the next real big feature that would need to get fleshed out. Realistically, if somebody came along with some other small idea first, I'd probably do that small one first, because that's such a big the tab thing's going to be a big undertaking. But I would like to see that at some point.
Yeah, it's like when you build a product, you're usually trying to focus on small effort and biggest value, right?
Absolutely. Like, well, no one's paying us for this either, so that's where I was kind of like, well, like, this is definitely a valuable thing, but now we're getting feedback on it. Like, we've had like a lot of, you know, really great little small ideas that were easy to execute that we just kept sticking on, and so we try to give everyone credit for that stuff that contributed. But yeah.
You know, Peter, if thank you would be a currency, you would be rich.
Hopefully, enough people are using this. But yeah, I mean, that's our whole goal for all this stuff, is to make our jobs easier, but then see if we can make everyone else's a little bit easier too. So
okay, so I just opened like GitHub, and I think contributors, you also have a Thomas. So I assume Thomas is not working in Redvan, and I saw also Daniel. So as you said, there are other people, right? Not only in Redvan that actually contributing, like also doing
there's people all over the world that have been contributing to this stuff that are not. I think Steven Hendricks and myself are the only people at Redvan who've contributed to this, I believe, anyway. I could be mistaken, but yeah, the rest of the PRs that we've had come in were from people outside of our organization. They're just using the tool and wanted to do something different. So yeah,
this is cool. So have you Have you got to know, like, how people got to know you? Is it like through Unofficial,
It's through you, man.
Salesforce Commerce? Through me? Like,
Yeah.
how through me? Like,
Well, no, there's the unofficial Salesforce, that's where most of the stuff started. So like, yeah, a lot of the like kind of brainstorming of this and then having different people test it was through that community. And then
okay.
being able to talk about it and ask, people to help test it out. And then even just the general ideas of like what other things we can do kind of spawned from that. So yeah.
Okay.
It's like, hey, we want to make a tool that might help people. What would you want it to do? And they're like, here you go. Here's what I would want it to do. It's like, all right. And then I build it. It's like, you mind testing it out? It's like, sure, here you go. And then, yeah, kind of an organic thing.
So how are you leveraging community and like what's role it plays in your life? I mean, what the value is behind it?
What role is the development process? I'm not sure.
Like, I mean, community, like, I mean, unofficial, the one that we have in Slack, right? Unofficial,
Yeah.
Salesforce, Slack community. Like, so how are you leveraging it? Like, what role it plays?
It's definitely changed over time. So when I first started 3 years ago, I used it way more. I think it was at some point within my first 3 years. I'm not sure how long you guys have you been around the full 3 years? You might have.
I honestly don't remember. I know
Feels
that
like
Matt actually posted somewhere that we had a birthday, and then I don't remember the day. But
anyway, so the answer is that like when I first started, I didn't know how to do Salesforce at all. So obviously, Red Band's got a pretty good support staff, but most of us are in the United States, and me being a night owl, I kind of lost a good portion of the people who could help me. But since the unofficial Salesforce has people all over the world, like I can go on there any time of the day and I can ask a question. There's probably going to be someone there who can answer it, So, and I haven't yet to ask a dumb question that somebody was like, that's a dumb question. So like I can ask.
There are no dumb questions.
Right? Well, that's why like as a developer, you kind of get a little intimidated that like maybe I'm in over my head and there's all these developers who are obviously way better than me. But yeah, I never got that from your Slack group. So that's how it started. And then as I got a little more experience with it, I started kind of answering questions whenever I could. And then that transitioned into like, well, hey, I'm actually at the point where I'm kind of building these custom tools that might help our jobs a little bit. Like who wants to help like test that out and stuff like that. So that's where it's at now is testing that stuff out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just step back. You said about dumb questions. Whoever watch or listens, remember, there are no dumb questions.
No,
every question is valuable. Believe me. Like if we all been there in a place, like in your career or even in a time when you just, I don't know, you have a question, right? You're not sure about anything. So there is no dumb questions, really. Like even like asking what is web, it's not a dumb questions. Not everyone's supposed to know what is web, right? Even, okay, if you call programmer, like if you call yourself programmer and you don't know what is a web, it could be weird, but it doesn't mean it's fully weird because maybe you are doing everything on, I don't know, some software, other stuff. You never interact with the web. It's like, I recently saw on LinkedIn in the comments, there was person, he had a title senior solution architect, and there was a problem to do, and I knew that you can do it 5 minutes max with Postman, right? And I commented out, and he actually described in his comment that no, it will be very complicated to write all the code, like I would spend more time. And I was like, no man, you just need to 5 minutes with Postman. But I didn't see his comment as dumb or like it just, he not used to work with the tools and I'm used to. That's why I know them. I know the stuff. So anyway, just wanted, to make sure that anyone who is afraid to ask the questions, don't be afraid. Go there and, with community soon, TikTok, 7 days more, or 5 days more, and we will get full history. So
we will cool.
Get the history will not be lost.
I mean, it helps everybody if you ask questions. I had a junior dev that I was working with for the client that I'm working with right now, and the biggest thing for them was just that comprehension that like you don't always have to do things on your own. Like sometimes if you know you're internally like kind of struggling with something, it's usually better to ask for help for the sake of your team, just so that they know that like, hey, it's like this is blocking me and it's slowing me down. If somebody can help me, then I'm over that hurdle and I can move on to the next thing. And if the longer you go not doing that, you're actually impacting everybody else. So it's actually better to ask questions ahead of time, especially if it's something you can get help with. So yeah, that's usually my advice to any new person who's starting out with this stuff. But yeah, having your Slack channel when I first started was a great resource because everyone's on from all over the world, and you can ask a question. It doesn't matter what time or day or whatever. It's usually somebody's going to be on there who can answer it for you, and then you're unblocked and you can feel productive again. That's the worst feeling as a developer, to feel like you're stuck on something and there's no one around to help you. So you guys have been a good resource for that.
I would even extend that tip with like not only junior, like even the senior. I saw people
absolutely.
like senior architects who actually struggle, and they are more afraid to ask the question, so no one think that they are not qualified enough. And I usually say, no one in this world can know everything. It doesn't matter what title you have, what seniority you have, you still don't know everything. So if sometimes just go and ask. This is what I'm doing. Like, right now I'm working for Salesforce, so it could be weird if I would go to community and ask the questions, because someone might think, okay, you are Salesforce, so you have to know everything. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I cannot know everything.
Doing something at one point and then forgotten it. Like there's so much stuff that I've done in my life with the web development that like I probably at one point did a lot of stuff, and I guarantee I forgot like 90% of it, and I'll have to. I still use Stack Overflow to look up things but I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm like, I haven't touched this for 4 years. I'm like, I used to do this all the time, and I don't remember how to do it anymore. So yeah, I don't mind looking it up. So it's fine. That's what the internet's for. So.
Okay. The last question that I have for today would be like, what you would like to say to have a listen or watch us for the podcast, like for the audience? What would be your message to the audience that you would like to say?
Well, I hope if you're watching this and you use the tools that we're releasing, that you find them helpful and that they're useful to you. And if they're not, then the next thing would be to make sure you let us know or let me know directly. I'm available. We've got all of our projects are on GitHub. They're open source, so anyone can contribute to it. So if it's not 100% doing what you need it to do, like we're usually available to make tweaks and make things available. So pretty grateful for the people who've helped make them a little bit better already. We've got a lot of great contributions. So like to keep that going and keep that culture of helping out your fellow developer, however you can, like, and keeping things going. Because at the end of the day, we're all kind of trying to do the same thing. So, like help each other out. It's a journey. So
cool. So as Taco is our official, unofficial community currency. So a lot of tacos to you, Peter.
Thank you
for all what you did.
It's actually my favorite thing in the world too. So if people who know me will think that's funny. I wish they were real tacos. I would be eating them right now.
Okay. Thank you everybody for watching or listening, wherever you are and what time is in the world at your end. My name is Oleg. Together with me is Peter, and it was an official podcast. Hope you enjoy it.